Marshals gave us another episode full of action and drama. And as we get closer and closer to the season finale, I'm genuinely incredibly curious about what's going to happen next. Will Andrea and Cassie finally grow closer to each other? Did Calvin completely forgive Cassie? What important mission is waiting for Miles? First, let's take a look together at the important details we saw in episode 11. And then, let's talk about what we might see in episode 12. First of all, I want to start with Roner's death, which we've been wondering about all season long. Even though it was truly a very tragic event, I'm glad that we finally got to learn about the traumatic incident that drove these brothers apart this badly. In the flashback scenes during the episode, we saw Cassie, Calvin, Garrett, and Roner involved in a difficult operation in Afghanistan back in 2015. And during this operation, we saw that Roner got separated from the team. And because the team thought he was dead, they pulled out of the operation without rescuing him. And this death really devastated every single one of them because they truly saw each other as brothers. And honestly, even though we only saw Roner for a few minutes, his death genuinely made me really emotional too. However, later on, we learned that Roner didn't actually die immediately. And after getting injured, he kept fighting for a while longer. But because his team never came back to rescue him, he eventually couldn't hold on anymore and lost his life. Of course, because of that, you would think that the person who pulled the team out of the operation would carry a huge amount of guilt. And we thought that person was Calvin. But the truth is, it was Garrett. Garrett told Calvin that Roner was definitely dead and said they could pull back. And because of that, Calvin withdrew the team. And Calvin hid this information because Garrett already felt guilty, and he didn't want his mental state to get even worse. So, he let everyone continue believing that he was responsible for Roner's death. Honestly, what Calvin did here is truly heroic. And when I realized that Calvin had been blamed unfairly this whole time, I genuinely felt really bad for him. Another very important storyline we saw in the episode was definitely everything Neil talked about. Honestly, I think the Duttons have caused more chaos in Montana than healing, and both from the things Neil talked about and from Cassie referring to all of this as his family's sins, we saw that Calvin also believes the Duttons are the real guilty ones. However, because Cassie saved Calvin's life under those terrible circumstances, and because Calvin remembered the past and started seeing Cassie as his brother again, it ended with Calvin forgiving Cassie and saying that he's forgetting everything he learned. But even though there's no longer any problem between Cassie and Calvin, at the end of the episode, we learned that Garrett died because of the damage to his lungs, even though the surgery itself was successful. And because of that, Calvin lost Garrett before he could talk to him one last time. And Andrea lost her new boyfriend before she could say goodbye to him one last time. And trust me, we're definitely going to keep seeing the effects of this death in the upcoming episodes. So now, let's take a look together at what might happen in episode 12. The title of the episode is The Devil at Home, and the synopsis says, as they uncover a drug cartel targeting the Broken Rock Reservation, the marshals race to locate Miles, only to discover that he has gone rogue to hunt down a trafficker. Both from the synopsis and from the promo, it looks like a very action-packed episode is waiting for us. And it seems like Miles will be the main focus this time. Honestly, in episode 11, seeing Miles meet with the senator through Thomas and seeing Miles's heroics play such an important role in preventing mining operations from starting at Broken Rock already showed us that the story was going to focus a little more on Miles. And it looks like Miles will continue his heroics in this episode as well. At the beginning of the episode, we'll probably see that one of Miles's friends dies from an overdose, and because of that, An operation against a drug cartel at Broken Rock will begin. However, Miles might leave this operation unfinished and carry out a raid on a human trafficking group completely on his own. As you know, we already know how deeply Miles hates the group kidnapping young girls. And if that same group or another group starts doing this again, Miles will absolutely risk everything once more to stop them. Because of that, we might see Miles's emotionally driven decisions put him in serious danger. However, I think both Cassie and Mo will take responsibility for making sure nothing happens to Miles, and I think they'll be able to save him. And once both the drug cartel and the traffickers are caught, they'll have even more heroics to use in order to stop the mining project. And thanks to Miles, we might actually see this mining project get canceled for good. Besides that, I definitely think we're also going to watch a lot of love drama in episode 12, and Andrea and Cassie are definitely at the center of that. Honestly, I always thought Andrea and Garrett's relationship developed a little too quickly. And with Garrett's sudden death, I think Andrea and Cassie are going to grow much closer. Most likely, until the end of the season, Andrea and Cassie will only spend time grieving Garrett together. But in season 2, I think Cassie is finally going to start developing feelings for Andrea because Andrea's feelings for him were always obvious. And I think right now Cassie is the one who needs to make a move. Plus, I think the relationship between Cassie and Andrea is actually very similar to the one Cassie had with Monica. So, we might see Cassie slowly distance himself from Dolly and spend much more time with Andrea instead. Besides that, even though Calvin said he wouldn't talk about the train station, in episode 11, we saw Neil's body resurface, and the police finding that body could lead to both Cassie and Calvin being questioned. And if enough evidence is found, people might even think Neil was killed by Cassie. And maybe the reason everything that happened at the train station finally becomes public is because of this situation. Honestly, I think the storyline will continue into season 2 as well. And I think the reason the situation eventually explodes is because Cassie acts way too independently. And I'm sure that one day, Cassie will truly have to pay for the Dutton family's sins. All right, now it's your turn. What are your theories about episode 12? Do you think there's still a chance for Andrea and Cassie? Will everything that happened at the train station finally come to light? Let's meet in the comments. Meanwhile, check out the video on the screen. You will love it. And honestly, if episode 12 really focuses this heavily on Miles, I think we could finally start seeing him become one of the most important characters in the entire series. Up until now, Miles has mostly been portrayed as someone loyal and fearless, but this episode might show us a much darker and more emotional side of him as well. Especially if he starts acting completely on emotion after losing someone close to him, we could see him crossing lines that even Cassie and Mo would never cross. And if that happens, it might create serious tension between Miles and the rest of the team moving forward. At the same time, I also think the writers are slowly preparing Cassie for a much bigger conflict in the future. Throughout the season, Cassie has constantly tried to balance loyalty to his family with doing the right thing. But every single episode makes it clearer that these two things are becoming impossible to separate. And if the truth about the train station really comes out, Cassie could end up losing everything he has been trying to protect. Not just his reputation, but also the people closest to him. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons Andrea is becoming more important to Cassie now. Andrea understands grief, guilt, and loss in a way that most people around Cassie simply don't. Because of that, Cassie probably feels emotionally safer around her. And after Garrett's death, I think Andrea and Cassie will naturally spend more and more time together. Even if they don't officially become a couple this season, the emotional connection between them is definitely growing stronger. Another thing that caught my attention in episode 11 was how much emphasis the show placed on the Broken Rock Reservation and the mining project. At this point, it feels like the mining operation is becoming the center of almost every major conflict in the story. The drug cartel, the traffickers, the political pressure, and even Miles's storyline all seem connected to protecting Broken Rock in some way. And because of that, I think the finale could end with a massive confrontation involving all of these groups at once. We also shouldn't forget about Calvin. Even though Calvin and Cassie finally reconciled emotionally, Garrett's death could completely change Calvin's mental state again. Losing someone before getting the chance to properly say goodbye creates a huge amount of regret. And Calvin might start blaming himself once again, even if Garrett's death wasn't truly his fault. So, while things seem peaceful between Calvin and Cassie right now, I don't think their story is completely finished yet. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if episode 12 ends on a major cliffhanger. Maybe Miles gets captured while going after the traffickers. Maybe evidence connected to the train station gets discovered by the police. Or maybe Andrea finally admits her feelings to Cassie directly. It really feels like the writers are building towards something huge before the finale arrives. But overall, I think the biggest theme of this season has been guilt. Almost every major character is carrying guilt from the past, whether it's Cassie, Calvin, Garrett, or even Miles. And the show keeps asking whether these characters can actually move forward, or whether the past will eventually destroy them. That's why I'm genuinely very excited to see how episode 12 handles all of these storylines. Now, I really want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Miles is making a mistake by going rogue? Do you think Andrea and Cassie are eventually going to become a couple? And most importantly, do you think Cassie will finally face consequences for everything connected to the Dutton family and the train station? Write all your theories in the comments below.